Welcome back to One Conversation, the podcast where we believe one conversation can change a life. We have a really exciting episode today. First and foremost, we have a brand new host in the room that we are so excited to have with us on our podcast. He's going to introduce himself in a second, but before he does, our episode today, we are in the month of June. June is Pride Month. So, today, what we really wanted to do is use this platform to discuss not only how we can be allies to the LGBTQIA plus community, but also defining what that acronym stands for and what those terms actually mean. We know that an ally is someone who is not in the LGBTQIA plus community, but they support and stand up for people who are. We know that when we show up as allies, we are actively working to strengthen the bonds within our own community and beyond. So, whether that be one on one interactions with families or friends or on a larger scale. So, today we're going to discuss a lot of these important concepts and really important considerations for being an ally. So, before we dive in, Miguel, our new wonderful host, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. So, hi everybody. My name is Miguel. I'm the new prevention educator here at Live Violence Free. So, a little bit about me is like I said, my name is Miguel. My pronouns are he, him, his. I lived in South Lake Tahoe for my whole life, and I'm glad to be back. Giving back to the community, and especially with this new episode, how to be an ally. I think it's very important, just because I've had different allies in my own experience. So I think it's good to talk about this and just give more information on how you can become an ally to people around you within the LGBTQIA plus community.
Yes, thank you so much, Miguel. And we're just so excited to have him on board onto the prevention education department. So, with that being said, before we dive into some considerations for being an ally and before we kind of talk about what that looks like, we are going to define some terminology of the LGBTQIA plus community. And actually, Miguel will be starting us off on some of that terminology.
Okay, so terminology within the LGBTQIA plus community goes a little bit more beyond, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer. We're going to go over those words today too, but I think there's a couple other ones that we need to define, and because they're not as commonly known. So cisgender, we mentioned that earlier. So cisgender means a person whose gender aligns with the sex they are assigned at birth. So I would consider myself a cisgender male because I align with what I was born with, the sex that I was assigned at birth. Another one is the Two Spirit. It's a term created by the First Nations, Native American, Indigenous people whose sexual orientation or gender sex exists in ways that challenge colonial construct of gender binary. This term should not be appropriated to describe people who are not in the First Nation. So this is specifically Native Americans or anybody that can identify as an Indigenous member. If you if you identify between both of the genders and you are a Native American or Indigenous person, then you can identify yourself as two spirited. Another word that I would want to go over was gender identity. So, gender identity is how a person themselves identifies internally. So, how I would identify myself, that is my gender identity. And then gender expression is how you express yourself to the exterior, to the world, how you present yourself. This can look in how you do your hair, how you do your nails, the way that you present yourself to the world. That would be like a gender expression. So I just feel like those are very, they sound similar, but they're different. So I just thought it was important to kind of go over.
Absolutely. And I think those are such great, important terms to go over because it can be very confusing for someone who does not have knowledge, right, in regards to the different ways that you can identify yourself or the different sexual orientations or just what the LGBTQIA plus umbrella looks like, right? And I think that's why it's so important to have this conversation, why we're having it, because it's so important to be knowledgeable, right, in regards to all these terms and how important it is to use our pronouns. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about that throughout this episode. But it's really important to note that, when you look at someone, you may automatically think they identify as male or female based on their looks, right? How they appear. But it's so important to not make that assumption. And so language has a significant impact on people. to be an ally and to really help, it's really important to ensure that language has a positive impact by staying current with the LGBTQ terminology and making sure that we are constantly actively asking for pronouns, right? To not just make that assumption just because someone may physically look a specific, way, whether it's male or female, right? We can't just automatically assume that they, identify a certain way. So the way that we could find out and specifically know is by using pronouns, right? And we don't always have to ask for their pronoun, but if you start off by identifying, your pronouns by introducing yourself by name and pronouns, that could help them, share their pronouns where you're not having to ask. But if that does not happen, you could ask what their name is and what their pronouns are. So I think that's just something that's really important to just highlight, uh, because it's something that we automatically sometimes as straight people just assume, right? And so we are going to dive into defining some important terms. We've mentioned the term cisgender in our introduction, and I know Miguel went over it really briefly, but cisgender is defined as someone whose identity and gender align with their sex at birth, like he mentioned, right? And, for example, we are all cisgender due to the fact that we identify and align with being, in regards to Lisa and I being female, right? And then, like Miguel mentioned, he was born male and he identifies as male. And so the term cis is just an abbreviation of that term. And so it's really important to know, again, what cisgender is and how it's defined.
Yeah, and I really just appreciate, I feel like, saying before, it's just really important to know some of these things, right? And just this education is so important. And even talking about pronouns and sometimes, just asking for pronouns. I think a lot of these things feel a little bit uncomfortable for people, right? Maybe they're unaware, should I ask someone for their pronouns? Or, maybe I don't want to ask what this term means because that means I don't know it, right? And I don't want to seem, closed minded or anything like that. And I think it's just really important. We're appreciative of everyone listening today that's here to gain more knowledge. But
Mhm.
starting off, I just think it's really important, if you are not sure, and we'll talk about in a little while, kind of how to ask appropriate questions. But yeah, we just really encourage everyone today to just be a little bit more mindful, right? And kind of willing to explore some of these things, right? Ask for those pronouns because,
Mhm.
if it's something that's seen as maybe strange to ask what someone's pronouns are in an introduction, it's really only strange because we don't do it very often, right? And if we all started doing it, it wouldn't seem abnormal, right? It would be a comfortable way, alongside of even like
Mhm.
a handshake, right? Of just how we introduce ourselves. So I think that's a big thing for us. Just keep in mind as we're going through and learning some of these terms, right? We don't have to have them all memorized, but I think just in a way, if we're willing to just kind of open up and engage and just take in this new information, that way we're primed with it, right? I think that's a great place to start. So, other than the term cisgender, we know there's a lot of terms out there, and of course, we're not going to define them all today, but we are
Mhm.
just at least going to start with that acronym, right? LGBTQIA. Interestingly enough, before we did this episode, I was actually talking with some family, and my mom, I asked her, I said, are you aware of like what all the letters mean? And she said, honestly, no. She started off, she knew the first couple, but the I, the A, she's like, I honestly don't know. So yeah, we thought this would be just a really great thing to go over. Again, we're exposed to this acronym a lot. And so we are going to start from the top. So the first letter in the acronym is L. And the L stands for lesbian. So this is a term for women who have physical, romantic, and or emotional attractions to other women. And it's important to know that non-binary individuals can identify as lesbian as well.
And kind of just to add on to that, I feel like there's also, if you're a trans woman, you can also be a lesbian as well. So if you identify in any form as a woman, that would
Absolutely.
categorize yourself. And if you're okay with expressing yourself as a lesbian, then you would be considered a lesbian at that moment. Um, and then the next one is G, my favorite letter of the acronym. Um, so the G is an acronym that stands for gay, which is an adjective used to describe people whose physical, romantic, and emotional attractions are to people of the same sex. So this is, I feel like a lot of people think that this is only for men, but this can also be used for lesbians. So anybody that has an attraction to the same sex, you can use the word gay, and I think it's a good word, just an umbrella term where it's, same sex individuals. If you like each other, you use the word gay. It's good for men and women.
Awesome. And the next letter we'll be going over is the B, and B stands for bisexual. This really just speaks to a person who has the capacity to form a physical, romantic, and or emotional attraction to those of the same gender or those of another gender. So people may experience this attraction in differing ways and degrees over their lifetime. Bisexual people don't need to have a specific sexual experience to be bisexual. In fact, they don't need to have any sexual experience at all to identify as bisexual. It can come down to that attraction alone.
I just love already just thinking about these terms and how it could just be very personal, right? It could just be, there's so many ways in which someone can personally identify or apply these terms just within what they're comfortable with. And so I'm going to say that even before we get to the end of this list, I just really appreciate the levels of inclusion that, a lot of these terms just really encompass.
I feel like it's always changing. So you can start out as being one thing, but as your life goes on, you're evolving, you're changing, and it could look very different. So this is what I like about, like you said, it's very personal. It's very, what you're in that moment. So, and it's up to you if you decide to identify yourself as gay, lesbian, or bisexual. That's what you want to, and it's very personal.
I love that. Yes, absolutely. Right. I mean, because we all evolve as people, right? And I think just culturally too, our acceptance, our understanding, our level of inclusion with even, respecting and honoring some of these terms, right? It just makes sense, right? That there may be a lot of different experiences out there throughout someone's lifetime. And now
Hmm.
we are, yeah, making sure we have all these different terms and ways that they can self-identify. And so, moving on, we are at the T in the acronym. So, the T stands for transgender. So, this is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity and or gender expression differs from what is typically associated with the sex they were assigned at birth. So, people under the transgender umbrella may describe themselves using one or more of a wide variety of terms, including transgender or trans. Many transgender people are prescribed hormones by their doctors to bring their bodies into alignment with their gender identity. Some may undergo surgery as well, but it's really important to know that not all transgender people will take those steps, whether that be hormone treatments, hormone therapies, or surgery. And it's really important to also understand that a trans identity is not dependent upon physical appearance or those medical procedures. And so, again, thinking back to cisgender, right? All of us in the room here today are cisgender. We align with the sex we were assigned at birth. JC and I align with being female. Miguel aligns with being male. And so I think, I've had conversations with people and they have a really hard time understanding transgender. And it comes down to, well, why wouldn't you want to be what you were assigned at birth, right? It just makes sense. And my argument kind of goes to, well, I can only imagine, like being a cisgender woman, I can't imagine if now in this body, I have the exact same personality, the exact same thoughts, interests, everything about me, but I look down and I was in a male body, right? Like I can't imagine what that feeling is like. But I can only imagine. Again, this is my privileged cisgender mind talking. I can only imagine that that might feel very similar, right? For someone who is trans to look down and think like, this does not add up for me, and this is not who I am, right? And so this is just something I think, lately too, there's been a lot of conversation around trans identity. But yeah, so really important that we do understand not only how we define that, but also those really critical kind of elements too, right? That, this individual does not need to undergo the surgery or take hormones to be a trans person. It's really just that feeling of, my sex at birth is just not who not who I am.
And I think
Absolutely.
just kind of having like empathy, I feel like that you may not fully understand what that is, but just being empathetic and just, like you said,
Hmm.
putting yourself in a similar situation, which I feel like we can always do that, is important to just be empathetic.
Right.
Because I feel like it must be hard. I'm not trans, but I feel like it sounds like it must be hard to just, like you said, see what you see in the mirror isn't how you feel or how you think.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's important to just highlight, yeah, like you mentioned, being empathetic and being kind, just like how we speak on survivor situations, right? Like, there's never a situation where we can clearly say we understand because we cannot understand what they're experiencing, right? That experience is their experience alone. And so I feel like when it comes to the LGBTQIA community, it's the same thing where it's like I cannot tell someone that's part of that community as a straight woman, that I understand what they're experiencing, right? Or that I could even imagine what they're experiencing. But what I can do is be supportive, be kind, be inclusive, right? And so I think that's something that we should all model and practice at a daily basis, and we'll be talking a little bit more about what that can look like and how we can be more inclusive.
Okay, so let's get back into the acronym. So the next letter in the acronym is Q. So the letter Q actually has two different definitions. So the first one is questioning. So somebody that may not know their sexual orientation, or their gender identity, they're still kind of questioning whether they are or they're not. You can use the word, that can be your letter. And also you can use the Q can also stand for queer. This adjective is used by some people whose sexual orientation is not exclusively heterosexual. So me being from the LGBTQ community, I usually use G, which gay, or now I'm using the word queer just because it's everything but the heteronormity. So the heterosexual component of it is that I don't identify with that. So for me, queer is just more of an umbrella term. If I don't want to be specific and letting you know, like, oh, I'm gay, I can just say, I'm queer, and it's just an empowering word. It used to be a very negative term, but now we're taking it back and we're using it to empower others to be, if any of the other words don't really apply to you, but this one feels more comfortable, then you could use the word queer. Um, and within this term, there's many other terms like gender queer, um, to describe their gender identity and gender expression. So if you express yourself in a very non-heterosexual way, this term can apply for those individuals.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Miguel, for going over the cue. I think that's really important and to be mindful of as well. And we'll actually be moving into our next letter, which is I, and that stands for intersex. This specific term describes bodies that fall outside of the male and female binary term. And so there are a variety of situations and circumstances where individuals are born with reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't fit the traditional male or female archetypes. And so this happens quite commonly. Um, it is estimated that about 2 in 100 individuals born in the US are intersex at birth. So, 2 in 100 individuals. So, perhaps someone is born with genitals or sex organs that fall outside the traditional male or female categories, such as a person born with testicular tissues and or ovaries, or possibly a combination of chromosomes that are different than XY or XX. Being intersex is a naturally occurring variation in humans, and it isn't a medical problem. So, therefore, it's really important to know that medical interventions like surgeries or hormone therapy on children usually aren't medically necessary. What happens is most of the time when a baby is born intersex, doctors and the family pretty much decide on a sex, right? Whether they want their child to be male or their baby to be male or female, and then they raise the baby as the gender expected of that sex, right? And it's pretty common for surgery to be done on the baby's genitals and also for the child to be given hormones to make them fit into male or female categories as they go through puberty. So whatever, hormone, whatever they were chosen, they have chosen the child to be in regards to their gender, whether it was female or male. And so I actually watched a pretty awesome documentary in regards to this, and how, parents have chosen maybe their child to be male, right? And so they may have kept those testicular tissues, but as the child grew up, they did not identify as male, right? They felt more of like a female. And it talked about, pretty much all the challenges they face in regards to that, right? And also just even knowing that their parent, or parents chose what they wanted their, gender to be, in regards to making sure that, they were raised as male, buying all male items, identifying to their child as male. And so it really talked about the challenges for this individual in regards to how they felt growing up as a specific gender that was pretty much chosen for them as a child, and them not feeling like they identified to that gender. And it was actually something that was so powerful, I think, and impactful. And it's just really important to be mindful of, right? And I think just as an adult and as a parent, knowing that this does happen, right? Like we mentioned, 2 out of 100 individuals. And so, if it's a situation like that, it's like, what do you do in a situation like that, right? How do you choose for your child how they should identify themselves, as a baby? Because you're making that decision for them when they're a baby. So it's not like they can tell you. And so it really talks about, all these different situations where there were parents that allowed them to choose, right, as they got older, if they wanted to identify a specific way. And then if they wanted to keep, pretty much both organs, right? Both sex organs. And so it was such a great, I think, impactful documentary. And I will actually provide the information to Lisa so she can link that below. But I think it's really
Yes.
important for us to just be aware of that and what that may look like. And again, we will never fully understand, especially if you are a straight person. And even if you're not a straight person, right? You may not fully understand, if you're not transgender, or if you do not identify yourself a specific way under the LGBTQIA umbrella. But it's so important, I think, to just gain that knowledge, right? To at least kind of even gain and grow that empathy, right? In regards to like, yeah, wow, that would be hard. Like I can't imagine being in that situation and having to make those decisions. But yeah, I just thought it was very interesting, and I wanted to add that last note, because I think, again, like I mentioned, so important for us to educate ourselves and to just kind of try to gain some type of knowledge of how that may look like.
Absolutely.
Adding on to what you were saying, I'm part of the community, and even in being intersex is such a complex topic, just because there's so many different ways to be intersex. I was trying to look it up to try to get a
Right.
Hmm.
with like a one definition, and there isn't a one definition because it looks very different, and it has that biological
Yeah.
component, which I'm not a doctor. I've never been good in biology, so a lot of that stuff I'm like confuses me. So I'm just like, but just
Right.
being aware that there's nothing wrong with it, I think is something huge. We're all different. So this is just
Hmm.
another way that we're different. That just makes you unique and makes you be who you are and live your authentic life.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I appreciate that whole addition. I would, we're absolutely going to link that documentary below. I would like to check out that documentary
Hmm.
because, yeah, I think, you spoke a lot to, we can't know the experiences of others. We can't, right? We can try our hardest to imagine and put ourselves in those shoes, right? But I mean, but that's really all we can do. And it takes us being willing to utilize that empathy. And again, as much as we cannot feel what it is like to be trans as cis women, or, just going through everyday life and navigating my life as a gay woman or a queer woman or however I would identify, being a straight cis woman, I don't have those experiences. But is it important to try to, yeah, tap into that empathy and, just really understand, to know, some of the realistic definitions and the realistic picture, right? And the realistic life, right, of a lot of people within the community, asking those questions and really being willing to sit and listen to those shared experiences. Yeah, it's so important, right? And it really,
Hmm.
I think it just really helps us in being an ally, but also just providing support to other people in our community, right? You know, no matter what, no matter where we are, no matter what time in history it has been, the LGBTQIA plus community has absolutely existed right alongside of the cis straight people the entire time, right? And so, yeah, extremely important that we do our due diligence and use our platform and our privilege, especially as straight cis women on
Mm-hmm.
this end of it, yeah, to educate others and to make a point that we, yeah, support and stand by, right, as much as we can this community in whatever way that looks like. And knowledge is just a beautiful first step. And so the last letter in the LGBTQIA plus acronym, although we know there's a lot of other ways of identifying, right? We'll go over one more actually, but the last letter in this acronym is A, which stands for asexual. So, being asexual can mean a lot of different things for different people. Our overall way of kind of defining asexual is someone who experiences little to no sexual attraction to others. So it's really important to know that this is very different, first and foremost, from celibacy or abstinence. We define sexual attraction as finding someone sexually appealing and wanting that sexual contact with them. So, although asexual people may not feel or experience that sexual attraction with others as much, they may experience other forms of attraction. So, the other forms may be romantic attraction. So, romantic attraction could include that closeness and that connection with somebody else. There's aesthetic attraction, which is being attracted to looks in a way where you might find someone beautiful, compelling, and attractive, although it's not that sexual attraction. Some might experience a sensual attraction, so maybe wanting physical touch from someone that's non romantic, maybe hand holding, cuddling with someone. Platonic attraction is also pretty common. This is instead wanting to be friends instead of romantic partners. And lastly, there could be emotional attractions. So, wanting that deep emotional connection, right? Really knowing each other on a deep level, really sharing and getting to know that person. And so, asexuality, this is a huge umbrella term. And it's really a spectrum. There's so many different levels of asexuality. For example, there's some asexual people that do develop sexual attractions in specific circumstances. So, someone may have developed a deep emotional connection with somebody, and then, in terms of that, created that sexual attraction, whereas other asexual people may not experience that. So this term really does mean something different for every individual. And that's why it's really important to have conversations, especially if maybe your partner does identify as asexual and maybe discloses that with you. Super important, right? To obviously have those conversations and discuss what they're looking for and what they're comfortable with.
So now at the end, we have the plus sign at the acronym because we know that these are certainly not the only identities that exist. So one of the what more that we want to introduce is pansexual. So pansexual is defined as someone who does not limit their sexual choices in regard to someone's biological sex, gender, or gender identity. Someone who is pansexual can find attraction and love regardless if that other person is the same gender, opposite gender, or transgender. So the plus is just I feel like throughout this whole podcast we've been talking about how it's very personal and very intimate the way that you want to identify, so that plus just gives you that room to be whoever you want to be at whatever time you're in that moment. So the plus is just very inclusive, that there may not be a term yet, but at least you have the plus sign, which gives you that space to be visible and to be who you are, even though there's not a term for that yet.
And I love that so much. Again, yeah, I just love speaking back to the level of inclusion throughout all of this, right? The level of, you know, no matter what, there's going to be a term or there's space, right, for something
Yes.
to come up and exist, whether or not, you end up defining that yourself or, that's a cultural thing that maybe you really identify and feel connected with. But yeah, I think it's really awesome to just have this level of inclusion, right? I think identity, as human beings, that's what we all want, right? We want to be able to,
Mm-hmm.
know who we are and, knowing who we are and kind of why we're here. That's like the existential question for humans. And so I think, especially in a society that has, really not been open and kind to the LGBTQIA community. And even through now, there's been change, but I can say there's a long ways to go. And so I think even, just looking at these words, I mean, for someone who may be straight and cis, maybe it doesn't seem like a big deal that we have these terms. Or maybe, I've also heard that kind of like other handed argument of like there's too many letters and all of those really bananas insulting statements that I hear, kind of speaking badly about, well, now they just keep adding letters on. I remember hearing that one time and my heart like sank. I was like, because what I'm hearing is, so what, does everyone want to be respected in their identity now, like outside of male and female? Because that's just why, like, that's what I really heard, right? That was kind of like the message I heard under that. And I was like, well, yeah, everyone deserves to identify as what they identify with. It doesn't harm anyone else, right? For someone to be able to say, this is who I am. And so, yeah, I really, again, I really love that we took the time today in this space to just go over that. I think for some people, even going over some of those terms might have been a huge eye opener. But to kind of just piggyback off of that last letter, the P for pansexual. Many of our listeners out there might be familiar with the show Schitt's Creek. It was a really popular show, one of the Canadian show, but it was fantastic. It did, I mean, awesome here as well. It's on Netflix. If any of you want to check it out, it's pure gold. So please go watch it.
Love
Do
it.
yourself a favor.
Love
Yeah.
that show.
Yes, I mean the whole thing is fantastic, but one of the most beautiful scenes I think in that show, because the main character is a pansexual man, and he identifies as he/him, but he's pansexual. And at first they don't disclose that first, right? And so in the beginning of the show, he ends up meeting a girl. They become really good friends, and they almost seem like they're just kind of on a friendly level. They end up, kind of being romantic with each other, and she had assumed that he was in the LGBTQIA community to some degree before they were romantic. So after they got romantic with one another, they're in a store together. They're actually picking out wine. And the way that she asked him about his sexuality, I think, was really beautiful. And the answer was so beautiful because she said, again, as they're picking out wine, she said, I only like red wine. And up until the other night, I only thought that you liked red wine too. And he immediately understood, right? He understood, oh, you're talking about men. Men is red wine. I get it. And he said, oh, he said, well, I do like red wine, but I also like white wine. And, I also like Chardonnay. And one summer I sampled a Merlot that used to be a Pinot Noir, right? And so it was like this beautiful. And he said, I like the wine and not the label, if that makes sense. And I thought that was such a beautiful explanation, right? And just way of really describing pansexuality, that it's not what's on the outside. It's kind of like, I don't care how you identify, what gender, if you have, changed or, aligned now with the gender that you're comfortable with instead of the one you were born with. None of that matters as long as I can feel that connection to you. And so, and I know, again, I just love that show. So I've done so much like nerd work, like listening to interviews and behind the scenes. And I saw a lot of beautiful interviews with them talking about how, parents and children alike were writing into the show and saying, thank you so much. My daughter's in the community, my son is pansexual, and just hearing that, right? Or having that be on TV and explained so beautifully really has like shifted the way, right, that maybe we see these things, or that people have interacted with us, or just showed that like there's this level of inclusion and we're being represented in a really appropriate way. And so I loved that. I loved that definition. So I definitely wanted to include that here. And yeah, again, if our listeners out there have not watched Schitt's Creek, I do recommend it. It's one
One of
of
my
my favorite
favorites.
shows.
And I love how
Yes,
you said representation
absolutely.
because I feel like nowadays there's so many shows out there that I'd love to see because there is that representation of lesbian, gay, and in a positive way too. Because before there was representation and it was a very negative
Yes.
term that if any youth would see that, it would be like, I don't want to be that because then I get treated like that, or you're represented in a very negative way. So just the fact that
Right.
there's so much out there. Because right now, I mean, I'm all about gay shows, so I watch that all the time. Like that, and it's because of that representation that I can see a positive message. So I just love these new shows coming
Yeah.
out with very well developed characters that aren't heterosexual or cis, cis people, individuals. So
Hmm.
Absolutely. Definitely. It's a must watch. It's such a hilarious, funny show. And I feel like you're constantly engaged throughout the show and episodes. So definitely take a look. So now that we have a clear picture of what the acronym stands for, let's discuss some ways that we can best practice being an ally, right, for the LGBTQIA plus community. And so I think it's really important just to highlight, that if you are a straight person, for example, I as a cisgender straight woman, um, I am experience a sense of privilege, right? I am privileged in a sense where I'm not facing discrimination because of, how I identify myself. Or I'm not experiencing any type of, hate slurs as a straight woman, or even, a specific type of bias, at work, at a workplace, or just in public. And so it's super important to be aware of your privilege and to also not just be aware of your privilege, right? But use that as a way of being an ally to the LGBTQIA plus community. And so we are going to discuss that a little bit further. So, firstly, when it comes to being an ally, it's really important that we recognize how negative social stereotypes and unconscious beliefs can cause harm. We know that in our culture, there are still extremely negative attitudes and assumptions that exist, right? And so maybe we recognize that we have our own stereotypes and biases towards the LGBTQIA community. And so it's really important to start that inner work to change that narrative. Or perhaps we are more aware of the actual experiences and challenges the community may face. It's super important to acknowledge that first. And then next, we can intentionally be inclusive and avoid making assumptions about others' identities, like we mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, right? So that includes not assuming someone's gender, sexuality, asking for someone's pronouns, and then honoring that as well. It's super important to promote diversity in your workplace. Also, and the way that you could do that is, by adding your pronouns on your email signature or during meetings when you're introducing yourself, like I mentioned, introducing yourself by name and pronouns.
Yeah, I love, and it's just such a simple thing we can do, right? And maybe to some that doesn't seem simple, but I mean, I think just updating maybe your little, your name on the Zoom call, right? From your name and just populating your pronouns at the end. Yeah,
Hmm.
adding it into your email signature, right? Or just taking that extra second in an introduction. My name's Lisa, my pronouns are she, hers. Really doesn't take much time or effort, right? And that is just such a big one. I've just I feel like culturally, just in life, right? I've heard a lot of the oppositional argument against just honoring different pronouns, and I mean, it just for me personally, it frustrates me because it just does not take a lot of time or effort to just be respectful instead of kind of blatantly disrespectful towards somebody else. But it's just it's one of those things where again I don't have the experience, but I can try my hardest as again a straight cis woman to put myself in the shoes. Like I cannot imagine if I was in a conversation with somebody and me identifying again being cis and I identify she her, if someone was like continually calling me sir in a conversation, like I would be, and after correcting, right, like oh like
Hmm.
it's she, right, if I was doing that all the time, like I can't imagine. And again, this is being spoken from a place of privilege. Like I can't imagine what that would feel like, right? Like constantly, like I'm not a man. Please stop calling me sir. That's not who I am. And so, just thinking about that level of just disrespect and discomfort, again, and it's only, I mean, amplified, right, within the LGBTQIA community, which is already marginalized, right? And then you add that layer, I can't imagine what that feels like. And so, again, pronoun usage, you may feel like it's complicated for you or something that's new or different or you don't want to mess up. But if you're trying your best, right, and just asking those questions, it's going to seem a lot more respectful than you, yeah, assuming, right? And maybe saying the wrong thing and saying it multiple times, right? And putting that person through that.
like that example that you gave about the pronouns, how you would be frustrated when they like if they would call you the wrong pronouns. I was thinking about the names. how many times have you been in a classroom where they call you by the wrong name or they call you by like a similar name and they continue, I mean, it's not your name, but it bothers you. I feel like we've all been like our names have been
Yeah.
mispronounced or just, it has to been the same. They call you Miguel or like just different stuff where it's like, where, yeah, like, that that's
Lisa.
just, especially when
Yes.
you've corrected that person. Yes.
You're like, that's
So I
not
feel like
right.
we've all been,
Yeah.
there's that experience that I feel like many people have experienced that name. So it just bothers you. And if you're correcting that person, just imagine how much more it'll bother you if they keep continually choose to use or mispronounce your name.
Right. And again, with all that complexity. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then so I also wanna so I also want to talk about, allies. So being an ally is somebody that's not within that same community, right? So I am in that community, so I wouldn't consider myself an ally because I am in that community, right? But with somebody that is an ally to me, it like we've been talking about privilege. So just that privilege that you do have as a straight cis person, sometimes other people may relate to you in that level where if they are straight, this is coming from a straight person, and you have that space in that room where you can speak about these topics, right? These topics that affect other groups like the LGBTQIA community. So just that privilege can go a long way because you're in spaces that many LGBTQ community members may not be in, such as using your platform and using whatever tools you have at your disposal and speak about these topics can help support and just shine more light on issues that are specifically targeting LGBTQIA. So yeah, so I just think it's important to just kind of like highlight that being an ally is just somebody that's not in the community but is willing to support and you know give that space to these identities that many people look over or don't give them that space because you are in spaces that maybe you know not a lot of trans people are or not a lot of queer people are in, and it's good to just kind of spread that message.
Right.
Absolutely.
Different access. Yeah, different access for straight cis people.
Another important consideration in allyship is educating yourself. So, really, just by being here today and being part of this episode, right, and listening in and wanting to educate yourself more. And so, it's really important to say that we can't say we are a true ally for any marginalized group unless we have done the work to understand as much as we can about the community and their complexities and issues. And so it's really important to remember that it's not up to the LGBTQIA plus community to educate us entirely. It's really important for us to avoid just specifically leaning on someone that we know that is part of that community, right? To kind of educate us on everything or putting kind of that responsibility on them. It's really important for us to see that person as an individual that is part of the LGBTQIA, but not the spokesperson for the whole entire community. It is great to really just ask respectful questions, right? To be curious and ask in a sense for you to educate yourself or to see how you can better support them, right? And so some of the questions that you can ask is, what was that like growing up for you? What can I do to support you? And the next tip is also share what you learn. You can educate others on the things that you know and understand, on the knowledge and information that you took time to learn, right, in regards to the LGBTQIA plus community. And so it's super important for you to consider opportunities for you to be able to share your support. Also, being part of maybe Pride group or an ally group, and it can be as simple as you having conversations with family, friends, peers or colleagues, right? Or even sharing something on social media in regards to how people can educate themselves about the LGBTQIA plus community. So it can be simple steps like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think social media is a really big one and a really tangible one for a lot of people, right? It's
Hmm.
sometimes it's really easy to find, like really great articles or really great campaigns, awareness months and things going on. And even if you're just re-forwarding that, right? Even not even putting your own personal opinion, but just forwarding that, right? So it's getting shared off into space. I think, yeah, it's just an easy way that we can, yeah, help promote positive messaging, help promote inclusion. So, that being said, the last tip that we are going to share out today is to really be willing to listen. to the experiences that are shared with you, and trying to do this without giving advice or making assumptions, right? Because again, me being a straight cis woman, walking into conversations with people in the LGBTQIA community, I can be as empathetic as I can, but I also have an intrinsic understanding that I don't get it. I can hear you, I can feel you, but I'm never truly going to get it. And so, especially, right, if I'm someone who's kind of coming into this and maybe I don't have a lot of exposure to the LGBTQIA community. So maybe this is me really kind of for the first time, right? Like hearing about experiences, hearing what it's like, hearing from members of the community. Then it's vastly important, right? That I really give them the space and platform. Again, not leaning on them, right? Like you're not the spokesman, but whatever conversation we're going to have, just really being able to sit back and just listen, right? It's really about getting to know not only experiences, but perhaps barriers, right? Challenges, things that as straight cis people we may not have faced or have had to deal with or maybe understand, right? This kind of intersectionality or this oppression or this kind of injustice, right, that they deal with and how that shapes who they are and how the community then treats them, right? So, really, really important. And another big thing is just if we do slip up, let's say we do have a moment, let's say we ask someone's pronouns and let's say later on we mispronoun them, right, by accident. If something like this happens, if you're in a conversation, if you just have a slip up moment, right, whether it be with pronouns or not, really important to know that we acknowledge this, we acknowledge we slipped up, we can apologize and then move on, right? i think I think we've all been in a situation where someone like apologized but then continually made a big deal about something and you're like, no, it's okay, and it almost gets
Mm-hmm.
a little awkward for you that you're like, can we just move on please? Right? And so definitely carry that over here, right? If we do, let's say, mispronounce somebody, super important. I am so sorry, they said this, perhaps, right? Maybe it's they use they instead of she or him. I'm so sorry, they, sorry about that, and just move on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't make a huge deal out of it, don't make a scene. And that's really what it's about, right? Because if we're just showing somebody that I acknowledge that, even though I slipped up, I'm acknowledging that I'm doing everything I can to just try to respect you. If I don't, I'm going to be accountable. I'll say, whoops, my bad. I'm sorry. And then I'm also willing to pick right back up, respectfully place in that pronoun, and just move along with it. That person's going to feel so much more comfortable and so much more respected, right? Granted, it might have that
Absolutely.
little moment for them where it is a little bit uncomfortable, but if you do that and you show them, like, I'm very willing to acknowledge and then correct this mistake because it's important for me to respect you, that's a really big deal, right? And so, yeah, I think we're all going to have a moment like that too. So just go in with that accountability.
And mistakes happen. I think that's really important to just highlight, right? Mistakes will happen, but I think
Exactly.
having the ability to really address it and acknowledge that you made a mistake and you are trying to not make that mistake again, and apologizing can just really be, it can really make a difference. And I speak on this from experience. I actually mispronounced someone and I felt extremely horrible because I had just experienced and had gone through an amazing training in regards to the LGBTQIA plus and how to be an ally, and how important it is to use pronouns. And when I introduced this person, their pronouns were they and them. They made me aware, and I introduced them as a she and her. And so I felt so horrible about it, and I clearly remember just being really even afraid to just have that conversation with that person and apologize. And I did it. And I clearly remember just constantly saying, like, I am so sorry. Like, I know better. And they were just like, it's okay. It happens. Thank
Hmm.
you so much for apologizing. It means so much that you apologized. And I just felt this sense of relief and just a sense of understanding from them, right? That they really understood that it's sometimes we make mistakes when it comes to pronouns, but it seemed like they really, appreciated me addressing it and apologizing. And I will tell you, that was like a life lesson for me. Since then, I try to be very, very careful in regards to how, I identify someone and not to automatically assume how to identify them by either their appearance or just by, looking at them or, just knowing them. Because although you may know someone, you don't know their actual identity or how they identify themselves. So again, that's why we use pronouns, right? And that's why we constantly want to model that and ask, just in case, they maybe identify themselves differently than what you think, they would. So I think, again, we are all human and mistakes will happen, but it's super important the way that we deal with, our mistakes and how we move forward. And again,
Mhm.
sometimes it can be a life lesson if we do make that mistake on how we can move forward in a better, positive way.
I love that.
And I feel like if I may add one last step to after apologizing, just like commit to do better, like commit to like trying to learn more
Hmm.
and yeah, apologize authentically and stuff, but also try to learn more about the community and actively try to search how you can
Yeah.
expand and I mean, you guys are great, straight cis, allies, you guys are like just the way that you speak about it, I can tell that you guys have empathy and want to learn more and have more knowledge than the common straight cis person in this topic.
Thank you, Miguel. We appreciate
Oh,
that.
I'm like, thank you for acknowledging. Like, we do try, there's a million other things we'd like to do better, I'm sure. But, at the end of the day, yeah, I think it's just, and I think back to that moment when you were saying that you mispronounced them, right? And you felt really awful. But I think about how many times did they have that experience, but it was probably intentional that someone was mispronouncing them.
Hmm.
And then afterwards, there is no apology and there is no authentic apology.
Hmm.
There is no desire to do it at all, let alone do
Hmm.
better, right? And so I think, yeah, there's a million more ways. I think I would love to continue to learn and show up. I think this podcast today, I think this might be a great start for a lot of people, right? Because I think the reason why a lot of straight cis people feel a little hesitant to really dive into the educational piece and really dive in that sense into the allyship is this kind of this uncomfortability that I'm going to screw up, that I'm going to do it wrong, that
Hmm.
it's not my community, so I don't really understand it, and it's a lot to take on, and I can't do all that, right? I can't know what all the letters mean. I can't know how all the different pronouns and the terms, and it's really not even about memorizing it all. It's just having an understanding and a respect for all of it. And when
Hmm.
you encounter it, that you're like, okay, yeah, I accept this, and I'm willing and able, right, to do my best to now further understand this myself and move forward, right, and maybe apply this next time, right, or apply this next time in life, or especially next time I see you and we interact, right. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, big shout out to the listeners out there that spent the time today, especially if you are maybe one of those people that were so unfamiliar with these terms. Maybe you are unfamiliar with the community, and this was really a big first and safe kind of conversation, right, in this space that you can kind of just sit back and take things in. We're really proud and really appreciative of this big first step, if that's the case.
Absolutely. And I think I just want to quickly highlight something that Lisa mentioned in regards to possibly, if you are a straight person and you're unfamiliar with the LGBTQIA and you are feeling some type of, discomfort, I think that's the first sign that, it's one, it's okay to feel uncomfortable, but two, that is the perfect sign that you should probably gain a little bit more knowledge, right, about how to be an ally. And you're never going to have a full understanding of the LGBTQIA because you're not part of that community. But you do have an understand. It's important to have an understanding of your privilege, right, as a straight person, and that's where you can start. Knowing that you can be an ally, just knowing that you are privileged in the sense that you are not part of that community, but as a straight person, you can really be a great ally and really help create kind of that safe environment. Because I think that was my starting point where I have a lot of family and friends that are part of the LGBTQIA plus community. And for me, it was really important to provide a safe environment, right? And be a safe person for them, when they are wanting to be themselves, because sometimes they feel like they can't be themselves in certain environments. And that's just not
Yeah.
okay. I can't imagine being in a situation like that where I feel like I can't be myself or I am not welcomed or someone is already being biased towards me or discriminating, right? So think about that piece and just, everyone deserves to feel accepted. Everyone deserves to feel included. And for me, that was a big starting point where I'm like, I want to be a safe person. I want to be able to provide that safe environment, you know. And so I think it's really important to be mindful that sometimes, you know, conversations like this can be very uncomfortable, but that we should find some type of comfort in knowing that this is where we should put in a little bit more work and do our best work, right? To really kind of dive in to gain some more knowledge and understanding in regards to, you know, the challenges that they're facing and how complex it can be.
Kind of going off what you said, there's a lot of resources, and I'm a big giving out resources for people that want to learn. So there is, I don't know if you can link it down below, but there's
We
the Trevor
can.
Project has a manual where it's like a 101 on how to be an ally to trans and non-gender. Um, it's specifically for youth, but you can apply this with the LGBTQIA plus community. So that's a great resource to just kind of start, just getting that 101, like, what is it? What does it look like? And just there's a bunch more information on there. So I would really take a look at that to just, if this conversation got to where you want to learn more, I would start there, and then there's a bunch more links there. But the Trevor Project is always a good starting point for anybody that wants to become an ally.
Thank you, Miguel.
Love that. We will definitely link that below because, yeah, we've said this on so many episodes. We're all about empowering our listeners. We are all about sharing out information, kind of both hands of the coin, right? We want to share out sometimes what to look out for and then what we can do. And so I think, especially in this case, right, we talked a lot today about how, if we want to be an ally, it's up to us. It's up to us to educate ourselves and get out there and do some of this work, right? It doesn't have to take all of your time, it doesn't have to expend all of your energy. But if you're putting any time towards this, right, if you're exploring these things, I think that's amazing, right? And there's some people out there that don't do the work at all, right? And
Hmm.
so I think you even just beginning to engage, beginning to maybe look at that Trevor Project website, to look at or maybe watch part of that documentary that we're going to link below. Any of those things, right? It's
Or your Netflix show that you were saying too.
Schitt's Creek, right? Schitt's Creek is another incredible one. And so, yeah, and listening to this podcast, right? So, doing little things. It doesn't have to be like you are going to the Pride Parade and diving in and you're like the president of your local ally club, but even starting small, right, can make a huge impact. You just really taking in a little bit of information can make a huge impact on someone's life and the way that they feel represented, included, and seen. And we all know that that's all we want as humans, right? We just want to be heard, seen, and loved. That's what is the undercurrent beyond anything else, right? So, yeah, for we're doing that education piece, and we're really trying in that. We're helping to get there. And so, again, big shout out for our listeners if you are still hanging around with us today. So, what we're going to do now, we're going to go into our meditation. I wanted to take us through an anxiety meditation today. So, what we're going to do to begin, we're just going to get into a comfortable seated position. And I want you to put both feet on the floor. I want you to start just taking deep breaths. I want you to feel rooted, safe, and comfortable in your seat. And once you're settled, close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. Take a deep breath in and out. Relax your muscles into your seat. On your next inhale, I want you to inhale for a count of 4 and exhale for a count of 4. Enjoy the feeling of these long, slow breaths, allowing your body to sink a little deeper into your relaxation with every exhale. And try to keep your breathing at this slow pace. As you inhale, imagine that you're breathing in calmness peace and strength. As you exhale, imagine you're breathing out all of your anxiety, stress, and worry. There is nothing for you to worry about right now in this present moment. All there is to do in this moment is breathe. Feel your anxiety slip away with every exhale. If your mind drifts to feelings of worry, be mindful. Notice it without judgment, and just bring your attention back to the breath. Slow inhale for 4. Slow exhale for 4. You are strong. You are capable. You can handle anything life throws at you. Notice how calm you feel as you sit and breathe. On your next inhale, take the biggest breath you can in and hold it for 2 seconds, and a big exhale. Take in one last big breath, hold it, and exhale. You can start to slowly come out of this relaxation. Remember to take some of this feeling of relaxation with you. And slowly just wake up your body. You can roll wrists and ankles, wiggle in your seat. Do whatever you want to come back online. But thank you for taking that moment, doing that self-care, and enjoying those nice relaxing breaths with us.
Yes, thank you so much, Lisa, for that wonderful relaxing meditation. I feel super relaxed now and ready for my day. So thank you. We hope all our
Absolutely.
listeners are feeling the same way. We will definitely link some wonderful resources below in regards to some amazing tips and considerations for being an ally. Because of course today we only shared a small handful of important considerations, right? There, the list can go on and on and on, and some great ideas on how you can be an ally and how you can practice that. So I just want to go ahead and acknowledge all our listeners for listening in today. I think this is such a great start in regards to you being an ally, right? And so definitely give yourself some kudos for being part of this conversation, for being here. And I also just want to highlight that it is so crucial that we model kindness and fair treatment and inclusion in our everyday life, right? It's something that, not only is it really important for us to do in regards to how to be an ally to the LGBTQIA plus, but also a great way of how to just be an amazing human being and how to make everyone feel included, right? And so try to go out of your way to be kind and always see the worth and dignity in every person. Strive for justice, for equality and compassion in human relations. And so we really hope, we will one day live in a world where everyone is included and everyone is treated with love and respect. And so, with that being said, to our listeners, again, we would like to just really thank you for being part of this important conversation. We hope you'll join us for our next One Conversation episode.